All right. Good morning, Doug. Today, I would like to talk about life philosophies. And I think that people, given the stress that folks are under at this point, and the pressure seems to be escalating, 'cause we certainly have economic trouble that's still going to be coming our way, market trouble, things like that. So it seems like in times like this, people are more seeking a life philosophy, just a way to understand how the world works and how they can relate to it successfully. And some people have asked specific questions of you and your view on these things, and specifically, you've articulated some philosophical ideas before. But why don't you just tell us what your basic view on life philosophy is?
Hmm. Well, the first thing that I actually got a grip on as an actual system of philosophy is I was very partial to Ayn Rand, still am. She's a genius, was a genius. Um, and what she called her philosophy was objectivism. Uh, and it has a lot of appeal, a lot of intelligence. It's makes a lot of sense. But okay, there was I think it was Jerome Tucci wrote a book called "It Usually Begins with Ayn Rand," a book he wrote about the libertarian movement, and he's quite correct. Usually begins with Ayn Rand. So yeah, I still recommend. In fact, the last person I was talking to, he asked me to give the four most important books that I've read. And I could do it right off the top of my head. Number one was Ayn Rand's Virtue of Selfishness. If anybody listening to this hasn't read that book, I really urge them to do it. It explains her philosophy very succinctly. It's only 125 pages. Okay, so you need a philosophy, okay? It was easy in perhaps the medieval era when the church was the center of everything, all knowledge, all wealth, all wisdom. And all you had to do was do what the church said. That was all you needed for a philosophy. You didn't even have to know what Jesus said because the church didn't want you reading the Bible. You might get ideas, start thinking for yourself. So you need a philosophy. I mean, there's so many people now that are woke, that are apparently into Marxism or socialism, which is rather amazing because it's been said correctly that there are more Marxists in American universities than there are in all of Russia today. I'm sure, I think that's actually true. So what the hell's the matter with these people? They're intelligent enough to read the books and want to find a philosophy of life. And what are they doing? They're going for a philosophy that its entire history is nothing but controlling people and killing people and making their lives miserable. It's absolutely perverse. I mean, I guess the world is truly in need for a workable philosophy.
Exactly. I think one of the things with it, when people look at Marxism, is a lot of it's based upon a critique. So looking at the problems that exist in the world, and it's easy to point out problems. And so if your philosophical underpinning is based upon your ability to observe and complain about injustices, observable problems from your perspective, it's pretty easy, because everyone can see it. Versus a life philosophy that is, more. Uh, that Aristotle might like better, or Marcus Aurelius might buy into, or Ayn Rand might profess, which requires a lot of you and a lot of critique of yourself, and demanding more of yourself. So I think that's probably why it succeeds. It just fills this vacuum, and it's an easy thing for people to buy into.
Yeah, that's right. It's some kind of a substitute for finding a reason for living. I mean, you need an explanation of these things. I mean, you find yourself in this void. What does it mean? What am I doing here? How did, you know, I remember I grew up in a cannibalistic death cult. In other words, I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church. And I remember going to grade school in the days when the nuns were dressed like penguins. And we would have catechism class, and they gave us a catechism. And to this day, let me see, what were the first questions in that catechism? Was it, who am I? And it said something about the creature of God. And why did God make me? I thought that was interesting. I still remember that. It was to know, love, and serve him in this world and to be happy with him in the next. And that stuck with my mind because it doesn't make any sense. I said, well, wait a minute. I mean, I'm just a little kid. And I'm reading the catechism. All the kids are, you're programmed. Holy Mother of the Church was telling you what to believe. I said, I didn't like the idea of being made by somebody else as if I was a robot or something. I mean, that I found that to be offensive, even back then. So he made me offensive to know, love, and serve him in this world. But wait a minute. Well, made me in order to love him and serve him? I'm not a fucking servant. What is this? I mean, it absolutely ran against my grain as a little kid, and be happy with him in the next. I had no reality out of the next world. I know the nuns were telling me, and you're supposed to describe, well, what do you think heaven's like? And so, gee, I don't know. Big buildings, lots of marble, oriental rugs. I mean, this is all crazy stuff. But kids are programmed with that. But actually, most of the kids that I grew up with that were indoctrinated in these Catholic schools, which are, of course, the church's answer to madrasas. We make fun of madrasas that the Muslim have. Well, we have our own madrasas here in the West, less and less, actually, because I think religion is a dead duck in the West, which is a double-edged sword, because people actually seem to need religion. They need to believe in something. And if they don't have religion, they got to find something else to believe in. So somebody comes up with a secular religion, and that's what Marxism is. And actually, as rational as Rand's objectivism is, it's actually, or at least her followers have turned it into a secular religion, kind of like Marxism, more rational, obviously. But, it's. I remember after I met Rand, and it was a pleasure. She was very gracious because she knew I was a fan of hers because I said kind things about her in my crisis investing book. And so I was invited to a private party with her. And after that, this was only a few months before she died, incidentally. So I went out to dinner with some of her acolytes, and they were acolytes. And we were starting to talk about, philosophical issues. And we just did not get along very well because they were so dogmatic. It was after they'd received the word ex cathedra from Ayn, that was it. And you couldn't argue about it. Otherwise, you were going to be excommunicated. It was just like a damn church. It really was. So, but like Tuchili said, it usually begins with Ayn Rand. Or in my case, it began with the Catholic Church. I don't know if it would have been different if I'd grown up in some Protestant cult or not. But then, would it have been a cult of snake handlers or perhaps holy rollers? Would have been that kind of Protestant cult? Or would it have been a more civilized one, like a Congregationalist or Unitarian? But it's all baloney. I mean, it's so where do you go? Listen, this is all about what's the meaning of life. That's what it is. What is the meaning of life? I mean, do you have an offhand idea on that?
I have several different ideas about it, and I definitely don't know the answer, of course, but I definitely think it is um, it's to try, fundamentally, to try to be what you might, and like to see what's possible. And I think that that's what I like about the Randian ideas a little bit. It's just like the human accomplishment, like pushing C to living for the point of living for, just for yourself, not for your, for the satisfaction of seeing what's possible and creating something, rather than being doing it to sacrifice for others, or for some other ideal that subjugates yourself. So I definitely believe in that idea, certainly, that you exist to try. And then I have a lot of stoic, thoughts about things with predestination and stuff like that, which we can talk about a little bit later. But I wonder, with objectivism, is what jumped out of what initially attracted you to it was the fact that it it was a counter to what you were learning in the Catholic Church, that you weren't here to serve someone else. Instead, you were here to serve you. And so immediately that problem, I'm guessing that was the connection for you, something like that, at least.
Yeah, well, that's the, listen, when I read, I've said this before, when I read the first page of Rand's Virtue of Selfishness, I remember when I did it, I had to put the damn book down because I could not believe that somebody had, in one page, the first page, crystallized and formulated what had been inchoate there, definitely, but in my mind. And so I tore through the book after that. So the Baltimore Catechism just did not have that kind of effect on me.
And how long
So
you adopted those ideas, I would assume. I mean, I would assume that you probably went the Randian route for a while, at least, because
yeah,
it opened your mind.
yeah, I became a true believer for a while. So I read all of her books, and they made sense. They still do. And of course, a lot of people, after they read Rand's books, which often happens for some reason when they're in high school or college, then for whatever reason, they decide to debunk it and say, oh, this is realistic, and this is all these terrible things that people say about Rand. But to me, this is a litmus test, because I'm certainly not a Randite, I'm not an objectivist, but people that try to debunk Rand and say that it's claptrap and ridiculous and unrealistic. I mean, this is this is a litmus test that's telling me there's something about this person. I just don't want to spend time with them, because one nice thing about Rand is that she has a romantic view of life.
Yeah.
It's of seeing possibilities to do anything. Now, whether that's possible or not to do anything, but and of course, I'm very sympathetic to Stoicism too. I read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which he didn't title it. It was just a diary, and I really thought it was just marvelous. It was a work of genius. And I may have mentioned this in the past when we were going about this before. It's that I know that Bill Clinton said that was the Meditations were the most important book he'd ever read in his life. And for somebody that has done the kind of things that he's done and believes the kind of things that he believes, this is amazing that he picks out the Meditations as being his most important book. It is a fantastic book. In fact, I'd like to reread it because it's just full of wisdom. But basically, it kind of looks at the world as being a problem place and a veil of tears. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's pretty easy for middle-class Americans to survive. I mean, really, plenty of food. It's great. I mean, survival doesn't seem like a thing to us, but survival is a thing to most people in the world. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. So Stoicism is a philosophy that you adopt when you kind of see the world as a rough place, but you want to live honorably. In other words, live with yourself. And it's funny, at the same time as Stoicism was big in the ancient world, and of course, Marcus Aurelius died, and I think he died in about the year 180, roughly, yes. So Epicureanism was also big at that time. And people say Epicureanism. Most people don't understand Epicureanism because they think of an epicure, which is to say a glutton, somebody that, just wants the most extravagant. But that wasn't what Epicureanism was about at all, the philosophy. It was about happiness, as opposed to, I guess Stoicism is about bravery, and Epicureanism is about happiness. But maybe it was about being with good friends and enjoying life, not overdoing it. In fact, the Epicures were big on very simple food and simple pleasures and simple surroundings.
Yeah, they would often be like the hobo lifestyle, even, right? They would wear the simplest garb and sleep on the streets, and just to show that they didn't need any of it to be happy.
Yeah, and actually, they were supposed to evolve for what they call the cynics, and the word cynic comes from the Greek word for dog, because there was a Greek philosopher who was a famous cynic called Diogenes, and they called him Diogenes the dog because he took this just a bit too far. He actually lived like a dog. And he's the one that but he was very famous. He was very, very, very quick-witted and smart. And he decided to live like a dog just because.
Compared to the great guy, right?
Yeah, what's the point of this shithouse planet, frankly? I mean, I can live this way or any way, I'll live this way. So Alexander the Great visits Diogenes and says, anything that you'd like, I'd like to present you with it. And Diogenes says, move away, you're standing in my sun. So, this is the proper attitude to an emperor, quite frankly. Yeah. But so that's the cynic school of life. And you can see how being a cynic today is kind of related to that, where you don't see the importance of anything. The cynic is somebody that doesn't think anything's very important, frankly. That's why you're cynical. It's one definition of it, perhaps.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But the cynicism, though, often it seems like it degrades all the way down to nihilism, though, which that's this cynics manage that themselves quite fine. They thought there was a point to life, didn't they?
Yeah, a nihilist from nihil, which means nothing. And that's kind of an interesting philosophy too, believe it or not. Frankly, I have a tinge of nihilism in my thought. This is why we were talking the other day about what is I guess South Park used to be my favorite cartoon show on TV. These guys are really smart. Especially when they go on a riff with Cartman. But all their characters are good. Although they're kind of crude and coarse sometimes, unnecessarily. But I guess my new favorite is Rick and Morty, because Rick he's actually a nihilist. I mean, nothing is important to Rick. Absolutely nothing is important. But he's actually got control of the universe. Rick can do anything, which he constantly demonstrates. But he can do anything, even though he chooses to live in this little suburban house with a bunch of idiots.
Right. Well, and the thing is, the traditional view, or the way I think of a nihilist, is that nothing matters, and so then you're kind of driven to inaction. And certainly in the case of Rick, like, he always has stuff he's doing. So he's like, and I wonder what his motivation is if nothing matters.
Well, Rick is very amoral. I mean, he thinks absolutely nothing about destroying whole worlds or killing anything. I mean, it doesn't affect him at all. It's a very interesting worldview. So I guess there's varieties of nihilism, just as there are varieties of the conclusion that I've come to. I mean, I absolutely, it's funny. People make have made like conservatism a value. People, you can ask some people, what's your philosophy? And believe it or not, I think there are people that actually say, well, I'm a Republican, as if that's a philosophy.
Right.
It tells me I'm talking to an idiot, and I don't need to talk any further if that's as far as his thought. And a little bit more advanced than that would be somebody that says, I'm a conservative. Okay, I can understand being a conservative. You see things and you want to conserve them. All right,
Not
that's
much of a
good.
life philosophy, though.
Huh?
It's more of a personality disposition, it seems to me, than a life philosophy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's a mistake to make a personality aberration into a political philosophy, I'd say. Yeah. So you've got people that are professional conservatives. They're conservative the way they dress, the way they think, the way they act.
And that by
Okay.
that also makes you very reactionary automatically, because you're basically trying to, it's almost in response to the progressivism, you know what I mean? Like the things that you feel compelled to do are driven by the changes you see in the world that you want to stop. You know, it's not even really to try and make anew or create something, to create anything. It's just to keep something from being swept aside, essentially.
Yeah, these progressivism, which has been out there for a long time. And I guess the most famous progressive in American history is probably Teddy Roosevelt, which is really a pity, because I'm sure if I'd had a chance to meet Roosevelt personally, I would have thought he was a barrel of monkeys. I mean, he was a great outdoorsman and hunter, and you know, wanted to do everything. And he wrote books, he read a lot. I mean, he was a very impressive guy, but he was a busybody. That was Roosevelt's problem. I mean, he was a busybody, and he had this idea that he knew what was best for everybody else, perhaps because he was so smart and so accomplished. And he wanted to form the world into what he thought was a better image, and it made him a disaster. So
I wonder, it's even these big isms are very tough to see as like a life. You know, they kind of pigeonhole your thinking anyway. And I wonder, well, I guess first, you started to say that you've come to the conclusion that a certain, it seems like you were getting to like your current life philosophy, your current belief in the way that the world actually functions and how you can successfully relate to it. What's your current view of that?
well, it's a question of the nature of reality itself. That's where you get right down to the bottom. The bottom. What is the nature of reality itself? And look, they say, I mean, since we have science to deal with these things as opposed to myth, they say that the world, the universe, everything that exists, started with the Big Bang, and that was roughly 13.8 billion years ago. Seems like a long time. But but in fact, the universe is still an egg. I mean, because it was born 13.8 billion years ago. I'll believe it. I mean, I don't understand the math, but it seems to make sense as much as I can understand. Okay. But we're still an egg, because how long is the universe going to last from here? Well, estimates vary. The mileage of the universe may vary, but it's going to last not just trillions, and a trillion is 1,000 billions, but maybe millions of trillions of years into the future. It's going to go on for a long time, but it's not going to go on forever. That seems pretty certain. They pretty much come to the conclusion that instead of getting big enough, and then after expanding, gravity starts sucking it back again, and it goes back into, a point that apparently, I mean, you can believe what you want, because this all goes to myth at this point. You can make this shit up.
Yeah.
And, it's so academic, it doesn't matter, that the stars will all burn out and it'll become a cold, dead, gigantic Hulk. But then again, maybe we have parallel universes. But if you have 2 or 3 or 10, why don't you have an infinite number of parallel universes, which is equally possible? So I don't even know. Listen, talking about these philosophies, it's like liberalism, conservatism, progressivism, Marxism, all this basically crap. I really think it's more important to deal with the nature of not just life itself, but the nature of reality itself. And that kind of puts things in perspective a little bit. And this is one of the things I like about cosmology. It's that, well, here we are on the Earth, and it's the size of a pea, and the sun is the size of a basketball, and we're about a basketball court away from the sun, which is giving us, and then Mars, and then Uranus is out there like at the edge of the city, about the size of an orange or something like that. And this puts things in perspective. And here we are on this time, and the sun itself is totally insignificant. And incidentally, our galaxy of 400 billion stars, more or less, nobody knows exactly, is just a tiny little galaxy. It's nothing by comparison with the universe. So this is how you can become whatever you want. Certainly you can become a nihilist when you realize that our place in the universe, and how does God fit into all of this? I mean, one of my favorite descriptions of the way this all worked out is the Watchmen. And my favorite character is Dr. Manhattan, where at the end of the movie, great movie, everybody should watch that movie, he decides, I don't know, maybe I'll go off and start life in a new galaxy or something like that. It's very well done. So anyway, thinking this way on this kind of a cosmic level, and you might as well, so the answer to the question after the long overture is, yeah, I'm forced to believe that I'm a solipsist. And solipsism is essentially understanding how large the universe is and how totally insignificant we are. Well, wait a minute. Maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm actually Dr. Manhattan. And, you can make up all kinds of, this is why I love science fiction. Maybe, I'm here on this worthless little dot in the middle of nowhere that other people seem to take so seriously. And I guess you have to, because we're stuck in these bodies right now, and you need the body to navigate around. But I'm thinking maybe I'm here on this body, on this shithole planet, stuck in a body, subject to the second law of thermodynamics, one of the very few laws I believe in, incidentally, because I committed some major crimes in another part of the universe. Maybe that's why we're all here. And you and I are like trustees on this prison planet, but the people in India, they're like down in the hole. They've been very naughty and degraded. Well, that's one view of the universe. It makes as much sense to me in fact, it makes a lot more sense to me than the idea that God or Allah or Jesus, maybe Jesus did it. or Vishnu. Who the hell knows that he created this and put me here to know, love, and serve him, or not? I mean, it's. I think it's worth thinking. This is the type of thing they say, oh, this is the kind of stuff that sophomores in college think about when they've kind of learned enough and it's amazing them, but they're immature thinking about these things. Well, no, actually, they're at a point in life. So everybody makes fun of sophomores, understandably, justifiably, but maybe you shouldn't make fun of sophomores because they're actually exploring in late night bull sessions, helped along by alcohol. They're actually exploring, what a strange place the universe is. And then after that, can't think about that anymore. That's the kind of stuff sophomores think about.
Right.
Maybe you should maintain that kind of view. Anyway, this is why I'm a solipsist. A solipsist, many varieties of solipsism, many degrees, basically believes that the universe is a creation of your imagination. Well, that doesn't mean that I believe I'm imagining you. I don't believe that. And you're not imagining me. Maybe the universe is a creation of not just yours and mine, but the imagination of all these other beings out there. And then it leads you to the question, well, wait a minute, beings, does that mean we're more than just, flesh and blood, like my dog? Well, in fact, I don't know if my dog is just flesh and blood. Maybe my dog is a spiritual entity, but a smaller one and not as evolved as I am. How do I know? I can't prove any of this or disprove it. So that's what solipsism is. It's a belief that, and I've always been a believer, incidentally, and take this for what it is, mind and matter, two things in the universe. Well, is mind a creation of matter, or does mind dominate matter? And should there be mind over matter? And if that's true, well, but then why can't I do the Indian rope trick? And why can't I materialize it? But there are people that say that they can do this. Well, most of them are liars and frauds and charlatans. On the other hand, I've actually met people that claim that they've done magic, or at least they believe that they've done magic. I've met people that claim these incredible things and they're not crazy. At least they don't appear to be crazy. Lots of different crazy things. I seem to run into people like that. If I think they're crazy, I don't hang out with them. Okay, that's just the formula for disaster. But if I meet a rational person that's had weird things happen to them, yeah, I listen because I think anything's possible. I take that literally, not under all circumstances, but as a matter of principle, I take that. It's a good thing to remember in the markets, for instance. Anything can happen, and in life in general. So anyway, that was just a wrap.
Well, I think
type of thing that you're used to hearing if you're a drunk sophomore in college. I understand that, but people shouldn't get out of that stage. I don't think.
I think having asking the existential questions are really important because they give you perspective, if nothing else. I mean, certainly even in a very practical life philosophy like Stoicism, which is very much focused on facing the world in the day. Marcus Aurelius spends an enormous amount of time explaining that he's dust in the wind, that that his life is insignificant in the grand scheme of things. So with that, still getting that existential perspective, I guess, on stuff. He spends a lot of time doing that in order to be able to have the right perspective to apply the practical kind of day-to-day philosophy. I just wonder, one of the things we talked about before is the concept of predestination as it relates to all this, which is it contradicts the idea that the world is a creation of your mind, and yet there's part of that that's discussed as potentially compelling to you too.
Yeah, and there was a there was a series on TV, I forget which channel produced it, called Devs, that 8 segment series. Very interesting, where it turns out that they've got a kind of a scientific proof of predestination, where they can actually recreate history and go back as far as they want, and one thing causes another thing. Yeah, very interesting, philosophically challenging, and nice thing about what they can do with movies and series today is that you can do everything in a movie today that you can do in a novel. In fact, you can do it better, because in a novel, you can read 500 words a minute, and depending on the skill of the author, you can construct the environment, but you can absorb millions of bits per second in a complex movie, much faster and richer than you can with reading a novel. I sometimes wonder if the printed word is going to completely go out of fashion, because the painted word is so much more effective. I don't know. It's possible. But what were we talking about just then?
In that series, basically, there was the idea of it was that they kind of proved that everything was like destined to happen. Everything that happened over history, though, you told me
Yes.
it had to happen that way. It was no way it could have gone any differently.
Right. That's what made that series so interesting. That it kind of proved that. Yeah, that's possible too. But in an infinite number of universes, absolutely everything is possible, I suppose.
Right.
So,
Sure. And the problem with
yeah.
predestination as an idea is almost the same idea is, or is the same problem with, um, with nihilism, and the same idea maybe with solipsism, is that they can move you to inaction. They can give you a sense of like there's no reason to move forward. Like I think that's the problem with people taking those ideas and really using them as a practical philosophy in their life. So how do you kind of, I mean, maybe I know you're at a different point in your life today, obviously, than you were, in 1980, where, you were still you're really making awake, at that, at that point, you're still shaping your existence the way that you wanted it. I mean, what philosophy do you think was your guiding your day to day at that point? I mean, how did you believe that a young Dougcasey could successfully interact with the world to produce the results that you wanted to see?
Hmm. Well, it's a good point. Frankly, I guess I was kind of one foot in front of the other, where I was just going places where opportunities or things or actions or people would bounce off of me and I could react to them. So did I have any particular philosophy back then? No, not really. I believed in simple Boy Scout virtues, and I still do, although I didn't have enough experience to put them into practical effect consistently. So you learn that over time if you have the, but I wonder if today, where do kids today get their basic moral footings from? I mean, do their parents, other than telling, do this, don't do that, and don't really explain why most of the time, I suspect, and they go to school and they get the same things, where they get some dictates where maybe they read a book or the teacher reads it to them. But where do kids today get their moral dictates? I wonder if kids are getting less of that today than they ever do. They probably get most of it off the net and off of TV.
I think that's true. I think that's where the woke culture is probably, is probably the best sounding board for cultural values, or what today. I mean, I bet it is. I bet those ideas of being anti-racist, or anti-sexist, or whatever those woke ideas really are. I bet you that those are probably the primary ones that are dominating kids' lives today. At least what they hear incoming about how they should conduct themselves.
Yeah, and of course, we're just talking about Americans, number one, which are only 4% of the world's population, or maybe Westerners, which were only like 10% of the world's population. But if you were born in a backward part of the Mohammedan world, and your education, insofar as you had one, was in a madrasa where everything in the world came out of this one book. I actually read the Quran. I've mentioned this in the past, and it's actually a shameful book. I mean, it's Jesus. To think that it tells me that people can believe absolutely anything. A quarter of the book is God telling you, Allah, excuse me, telling you how great he is, and a quarter of the book telling you, I've got to read it again, because it's incredible to me that it's actually gibberish. Most of it is actually gibberish. And about what percentage of the world, about 20% of the world take this stuff seriously. So further proof that we live on a prison planet, quite frankly. I mean, these people are out there. I mean, what we're thinking and what we think is important and what we're talking about isn't even remotely on these people's radar screen after they find some roots and berries to keep them alive from day to day and ward off various serious diseases. I'm not talking like COVID, I'm talking about serious things. And then the only thing they've got to put in their head is what an early medieval bandit wrote, perhaps under the influence of some kind of controlled substance. I mean, it's just crazy. And this is what the world runs on. It's just amazing to me. But it doesn't answer the question, what should you do now?
Yeah.
I mean, thinking about this stuff may be counterproductive for somebody that's in his 20s and needs to make it in the world, needs to keep the wolf from the door. Maybe you only think about these things when you have the leisure to think about them.
Well, I think that there are practical the practical philosophies that you find, though, in Stoicism, for instance, I think they are useful for helping you confront the day, though. I really do. And I mean, you said what you think you were doing is just putting one foot in front of another. I think that is shockingly good advice, because what happens is that people have this idea that they should have the final answer in mind. They should know where things will end and that they should be pursuing their passion or their dream in some way. Of course, that's ridiculous to somebody who is trying to keep the wolves at the door, trying to push them back. To think about your passion is sort of silly at that point. I mean, it's like your passion is to stay alive, I think, at that point. And so the first step, the thing that you can do in the world around you, is actually usually obvious. You may not want to do it, but it's usually obvious what you could do to improve your situation. And then once you take that step, the next step does seem pretty obvious, but it won't seem obvious until after you take that first one. So I just think it's avoiding major mistakes, and then avoiding like these hugely leveraged errors, which you could do in debt, or you could have with relationships, or getting involved in criminal activity or whatever. I mean, those things are hugely leveraged mistakes that, like, the repercussions are so massive for error that you want to avoid those. But other than that, it's taking the obvious step, and then the next step becomes obvious. I think that's what I got from Stoicism, frankly.
I think you're right. It seems to me that the most basic, what is it that all living entities have in common? And I think the one thing all living entities, I don't care if it's an amoeba or a person or a corporation or a government, doesn't matter. All living entities, their prime directive is to survive. Okay, what does that mean? Well, in order to survive, you've got to grow and become wealthier and defend you. You've got to build your own world of, Minecraft. You got to build your own city. That's how you survive. So it all comes from surviving. So I guess that's the motivator. And while you're surviving, you can have all these wonderful thoughts. And then maybe if you're evolved enough, you can get out of your body and go to a different universe like Dr. Manhattan did one day. But it's just about surviving. So
Surviving, just about surviving. But I think that the part about, it seems to me like, I believe, I'm a Stoic, so I believe in Stoic ideas, including predestination even. But I do think that the choice you have around maybe if you imagine like the simulation theory or something like that, where you can create the world, it seems to me that the one clear choice you probably do have is you can choose to view things from the point of view of fear, which causes you to like kind of collapse on yourself for survival, or as openness and growth and curiosity. And it seems like you can control that part of your point of view about the world. You can have the same experience as somebody else, but if you view it fearfully, then you end up like kind of collapsing and building walls around yourself. And if instead of you view it as something that is it's an expansive opportunity in some way, like that you chase it with some curiosity, then it seems like it's more life affirming anyway. And I think you have the choice around that attitude more than anything else. So that's what I got from Marcus Aurelius.
yeah, but I don't believe in predestination because for one thing, I believe anything is possible. And I'm not sure if you believe in predestination, you can also believe that anything is possible, because only one thing is possible if you're predestined. I think that's that's a conflict.
That's a conflict. Yep.
Yeah. And the other thing with predestination is that it would seem to imply that there is somebody that created that path that you have to walk. And since I don't believe I have a creator, I have to rule it out for that reason. But this is why it's fun to talk about philosophy, because who really knows? None of us really know. Only Ayn Rand thought she knew, and actually she came as close as anybody else to figuring it out, but she didn't.
Pretty damn close. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for the philosophical conversation, Doug. I really appreciate it. Always enjoy it. Like sophomores in college.
Just some idle thoughts, Matt. That's all it is. And we weren't even drinking.
No, we should try that sometime though. Talk about happy hour or something.
Maybe and lose half our subscriber base, which is unimportant anyway, because we're doing this for our own amusement. It doesn't make any difference. And now we get back to this philosophical question again. It doesn't make any difference. Okay, let's talk to you tomorrow.